Rain tapped gently against the cafe windows, turning the outside world into a blur of moving lights and umbrellas. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air. Mixing with the soft hum of quiet conversations, Amara moved quickly between the tables, balancing trays of drinks and plates of food with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She wore her plain black waitress uniform, her hair tied back neatly, and a smile that hid how tired she really was. For months, she had been working double shifts, saving every dollar she could for her mother's surgery. Her feet ached, her hands were rough from constant washing, but she never complained. Every coin she earned mattered. Every shift brought her one step closer to hope. The cafe door opened with a sharp ring of the little brass bell, and the air seemed to shift. In stepped a tall man, his suit dark and perfectly fitted, a silver watch gleaming on his wrist. His shoes shone as if they had never touched dirt, and his hair was styled like he had just walked out of a magazine. People turned their heads, curious, but his eyes didn't meet theirs. He looked around like he was measuring the worth of the place, his lips curling into the faintest smirk. Amara noticed him immediately, not because of his looks, but because of the way he carried himself, like he owned everything his eyes touched. He sat at a table by the window without waiting to be seated, leaning back in the chair with casual arrogance. Amara took a deep breath, grabbed her notepad, and walked over. "Good evening, sir," she said politely. "What can I get for you?" He looked her over slowly, his eyes moving from her face down to her uniform, lingering longer than they should have. His smirk grew. "Coffee, black," he said, "and maybe a smile that's real, not the fake one you give to customers." Amara's hand tightened slightly on her pen, but she kept her voice calm, coming right up. When she returned with his coffee, he was on the phone. Speaking in a low, confident voice, he ended the call and gave her a look that made her feel like she was part of some private joke only he understood. "So, Amara," he said, reading her name from the tag on her chest, "do you like working here, or do you dream of something bigger?" She blinked, wondering why he was asking. "I like my job," she said simply. "It's honest work," he chuckled. "Honest work. That's just a way to stay poor, sweetheart." The word sweetheart slid out of his mouth like an insult disguised as charm. Amara felt the heat rise in her chest, but she refused to let him see it. Over the next few minutes, his comments became sharper, his tone more disrespectful. He talked about her skin, her accent, and her small-town attitude as if these were flaws to laugh at. Other customers began to notice, some looking uncomfortable, others pretending not to hear. Amara wanted to walk away, but this was her job, and she had learned long ago that keeping calm was the best way to handle difficult people. But then he leaned forward, his eyes gleaming, and reached out to touch her wrist. It was not a friendly touch, it was possession, like he was testing how far he could go. The cafe seemed to go silent in that moment, the clink of cups and the hum of voices fading. Amara froze for half a second, then stepped back. Breaking his grip, her heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "You need to leave," she said, loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. He laughed, shocked. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," she said, "a customer who just crossed the line." Gasps and whispers spread through the cafe as she pointed to the door. "Out," she said firmly, "before I call the police." For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but something in her eyes told him she wasn't bluffing. He stood slowly, adjusting his expensive suit, his face twisting into a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't over," he muttered as he walked out. The bell above the door ringing again as the rain swallowed him. The cafe burst into quiet murmurs. Some customers smiling at her bravery, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Amara didn't care about their opinions. She only cared that she had done what was right. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the untouched coffee and carried it back to the counter. She didn't know it yet, but someone in the cafe had recorded the entire scene on their phone. Okay? By nightfall, that video would be racing across the internet, and by morning, her life would never be the same again the next morning. Amara woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing non-stop on the small table beside her bed. Her apartment was quiet, except for the steady drip of the old bathroom tap. She rubbed her eyes, thinking maybe her alarm had gone off by mistake, but when she unlocked her phone, her breath caught. There were dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages, and countless notifications. Her social media accounts were flooded with tags and mentions. She didn't understand what was happening until she saw it, the video. It was shaky, filmed from a phone at one of the cafe tables. It showed her standing in front of the man in the expensive suit. Refusing to be intimidated, it caught every word, every movement, including the moment she pulled her wrist away and told him to leave. The person who posted it had written, "This is how you deal with rich bullies." The caption had been shared thousands of times. Amara stared at the screen, her heart racing. She didn't know whether to be proud or scared. By mid-morning, the video had millions of views. People called her a hero, a role model, a fighter. Others criticized her, saying she should have kept quiet because he was rich and powerful. Her hands shook as she read through the comments. Some messages were kind, offering her support. Others were full of insults and threats. She didn't reply to any of them. At the cafe, the atmosphere was different that day. Every customer seemed to recognize her, whispering as she passed. Some gave her thumbs up. Others took sneaky photos. Her coworkers looked at her with a mix of admiration and fear. Around lunchtime, her manager called her into the back office. He was a short man with thinning hair and worry lines etched deep into his forehead. "Amara," he said, closing the door behind them, "we have a problem." He explained that the cafe owner had been contacted by someone from the Billionaire's company. They were not happy. "They're talking about suing or making trouble for us," the manager said. His voice tense. Amara felt a heavy weight settle in her chest. She had only stood up for herself, but now it seemed she had pulled her workplace into a storm. Her manager sighed. "I'm on your side, but the owner." He's scared, Amara. She nodded slowly. "I understand," she said, though inside she was already worrying about how she would take care of her mother if she lost her job. As the day went on, she noticed more and more people outside the cafe. Some were reporters with cameras. Others were strangers holding their phones up. Hoping to catch a glimpse of her, she kept her head down and worked, pretending not to notice. But her chest felt tight, and her thoughts kept returning to her mother's pale face in the hospital bed. She couldn't afford to get fired. She couldn't afford any of this attention. It was just past 8 p.m. when the strange sound began. At first, it was faint, like a distant rumble. Then it grew louder, a deep, chopping noise that made the windows tremble. Customers looked up from their meals, frowning. One of them gasped, pointing toward the large glass window at the front. Amara followed their gaze, her eyes widening in the parking lot outside. A black helicopter was descending, the bright spotlight under its nose cut through the night rain. Wind from the spinning blades whipped leaves and papers into the air. Car alarms went off as the machine landed smoothly. People inside the cafe pressed their faces to the glass. Phones came out instantly, recording the unexpected scene. The helicopter door opened slowly, and a tall figure stepped out. He wore a long, dark coat that flapped in the wind. His silver hair glinted under the spotlight, even from inside Amara. Catelli carried himself with quiet authority. He didn't hurry, didn't glance around nervously. He walked like a man who knew the world would wait for him. And then she realized she had seen his face before. Victor Hale, one of the richest men in the country, the owner of multiple companies, and the father of the man she had thrown out of the cafe. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Victor approached the cafe door. The bell rang as he stepped inside, his coat still moving slightly from the wind outside. All eyes were on him, the air thick with curiosity and tension. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on Amara. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a small nod, he walked straight to her. "Miss Amara," he said, his voice deep and calm. She swallowed and nodded. "Yes." "I would like to speak with you," he said. His tone was polite, but carried a weight that made the whole cafe silent. Amara glanced at her manager, who looked both terrified and curious. Victor gestured toward a corner booth. They sat down, the entire room pretending not to watch. "Though every ear was listening, I saw the video," Victor began, "and I saw what you did." Amara braced herself, expecting anger. But instead, his next words made her heart skip. "I am here with a proposal, one that might change your life." The cafe had never been this silent before. Every table, every chair, every customer seemed frozen in place. The rain outside pressed against the windows in silver streams. But no one looked away from the man sitting across from Amara. Victor. Hale was not just another rich businessman. He was the kind of man people read about in magazines, the kind whose decisions could change entire cities. Now he sat there, his coat damp from the rain, his sharp gray eyes studying her like she was the only person in the world. "I know who you are," Amara said quietly, her voice steady even though her hands were resting stiffly in her lap. Victor's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then, "You know I don't usually walk into small cafes in the middle of the night." He leaned back slightly, his presence filling the booth. "I'm here because of what you did last night and because of who you did it to." Amara kept her eyes on him. "Your son," she said simply. His smile faded, and there was a shadow of disappointment in his eyes. "Yes, my son," Victor said slowly. "Ethan has been given everything in life, and unfortunately, that has made him believe he can take anything he wants." Amara stayed quiet, unsure where this was going. Victor reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather notebook, placing it on the table. "I've been watching him ruin things, friendships, business deals, trust," Victor said. "But when I saw that video of you, I saw something else. Someone who wasn't afraid of him." He looked directly at her, his voice low but sharp. "Do you know how rare that is?" Amara didn't answer, but she felt the weight of his words sink in. Victor glanced briefly around the cafe, noticing how many people were pretending not to listen. He leaned forward, lowering his voice even more. "I came here with an offer. But before I explain it, I want to ask you something. Why didn't you just stay quiet?" The question caught her off guard. She thought for a moment, then said, "Because silence makes bullies stronger. And I've seen too many people lose themselves because they stayed quiet." Victor studied her like he was reading a page only he could understand. Finally, he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "My offer is simple," he said. "I want you to work with me, not for me, with me." Amara blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "I need someone with courage and honesty." Victor continued, "Someone who isn't blinded by money or titles." He opened the leather notebook, revealing pages filled with handwritten notes, business plans, and sketches of buildings. "This is a community project I've been building for years. Schools, housing, health centers, for people who've been ignored by the system." He tapped one page. "I want you to lead part of it." Amara's mind spun. She was a waitress, not a businesswoman, not a leader. "Why me?" she asked. Victor's eyes softened slightly. "Because you have something money can't buy: respect from ordinary people, and the strength to stand alone." She looked down at her hands, still unsure, the thought of her mother's hospital bills flashed in her mind. This could solve everything, but there had to be a catch. "There is one condition," Victor said, confirming her suspicion. I need you to appear as my personal guest at a high-profile charity gala next week. Amara's eyebrows rose. Your guest? He nodded. It will send a message that I value people like you more than the spoiled heirs of my world. Her first instinct was to refuse. She didn't belong in rooms filled with gold chandeliers and people in diamond jewelry. But then she thought of the people Victor said he wanted to help, and of her mother waiting for surgery. Before she could answer, the cafe door swung open again, letting in a gust of cold, wet air. The scent of expensive cologne hit her before she even turned her head. Ethan Hale stepped inside, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. He was wearing another perfectly tailored suit, but his hair was slightly out of place when his eyes landed on Amara and his father sitting together. His jaw tightened. "Well," Ethan said with a forced smile, "I see you've made a new friend, Dad?" Victor's voice stayed calm. "Sit down, Ethan." But Ethan didn't sit. He stepped closer to the table. His eyes locked on Amara. "You must be enjoying your 15 minutes of fame," he said to her, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Amara didn't reply. Ethan's smile faded, and for a second she saw a flash of the same arrogance from last night. Victor's hand rested flat on the table, his voice firm. "Enough." Ethan looked at his father in disbelief. "You're taking her side." Victor didn't hesitate. "I'm taking the side of respect." "Something you still don't understand." A tense silence filled the cafe. Finally, Ethan shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and turned to leave the bell above. The door jingled as he disappeared back into the rainy night. Victor turned back to Amara, his expression unchanged. "As I was saying, think about my offer," he said. "This is more than just a job. It's a chance to do something that matters." Amara met his gaze, her heart pounding somehow. She knew her decision tonight could change her life forever. Amara sat across from Victor Hale, still hearing the faint hum of the helicopter blades outside. Rain streaked the windows behind him, catching the dim cafe light like silver threads. His offer hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible to ignore. She could still see the outline of Ethan's shadow in her mind, his arrogance, his smirk, the way he had looked at her like she was nothing. And now, here was his father, offering her something that sounded like a doorway to a different life. Victor leaned forward slightly, his fingers resting on the leather notebook. He had shown her earlier. "You don't have to give me an answer tonight," he said, "but I want you to understand what I'm offering." He tapped one page of the notebook. "This project will build homes for hundreds of families, give education to children who have never had a chance, and provide clinics where there are none." Amara listened quietly, her mind racing. "You could run one part of it, your own team, your own budget, your own vision," he continued. She shook her head slightly. "I'm just a waitress." Victor's eyes softened. "No, you're not. You're someone who knows what it means to fight for dignity." She looked down at her hands, feeling the roughness in her skin from years of work. Her life had always been about getting through the day, paying the bills, making sure her mother had what she needed. The idea of doing something bigger, something that actually mattered to people she'd never met, it was overwhelming. But then Victor spoke again, and his next words made her heart skip. "There's one thing I'll need from you before I put your name on this project," Amara raised her eyes slowly. "What's that?" Victor smiled faintly, though there was a weight behind it. "I need you to stand beside me at a charity gala next week," he said, "as my personal guest." Her brows knitted together. "Why?" He didn't hesitate. "Because my world listens to appearances, and if they see you at my side, it will force them to see the value of someone they would normally ignore." The thought made her uneasy. She could already imagine the stares, the whispers, the cruel smiles hiding behind champagne glasses. "I don't belong in that kind of place," she said quietly. "That's exactly why you should be there." Victor replied, You'll walk in, and every person who thinks they're better. Then you will have to question it. His words were steady, but she could hear the deeper meaning. This wasn't just about her. It was about sending a message. Still, part of her wondered if there was more to his reason than he was telling. And, "What happens if I say no?" she asked. Victor didn't blink. "Then you go back to your life, and I go back to mine," he said. "But we both know the chance to change things doesn't come twice." Amara thought about her mother's hospital bills, about the night. She had been forced to choose between paying rent and buying her mother's medication. She thought about the faces of the customers at the cafe who had quietly slipped her extra tips, knowing she needed them, and she thought about Ethan. How many more people had been treated the way he had treated her, but stayed silent? Her chest rose and fell slowly. "If I do this, I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not," she said. Victor's mouth curved into a small, voluptuous, approving smile. "Good. That's exactly why I came to you." She didn't give him a yes or no yet. But she didn't walk away either. They talked for a while longer. About the project, about the gala, and about the people who would be there. He warned her that not everyone in the room would welcome her, and that some might try to provoke her. Amara's answer was simple. "I'm not afraid of stairs." When Victor finally stood, the cafe seemed to breathe again. Every pair of eyes followed him as he walked toward the door. He paused, looking back at her one last time. "Think about it, Amara. Your decision will change more than just your life." Then he stepped out into the rain, his coat dark against the night. Moments later, the sound of the helicopter blades roared again. Sending a wave of wind against the windows, Amara stood at the counter, watching the black shape rise into the clouds until it was gone. Her coworkers rushed over, demanding to know what he had said, but Amara didn't share the details. She only said, "He made me an offer," before slipping off her apron and heading home. On the walk back, the rain clung to her hair and skin, but her mind was far away. She imagined herself at that gala, under the heavy lights, with strangers watching her every move. She imagined her mother's smile if she could tell her that the hospital bills were paid, and she imagined the strange. The night of the gala came faster than Amara expected. One moment she was standing in her small apartment, staring at a dress she had never imagined wearing. The next, she was stepping out of a sleek black car in front of a building that looked like a palace. Golden light poured from its tall glass doors, spilling onto the red carpet. Her heels clicked softly against the stone as she walked, every step feeling heavier than the last. Victor Hale stood beside her, calm and steady, as if this world belonged to him, because in many ways it did. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but his eyes kept glancing toward her, making sure she was keeping her head high. "Remember," he said quietly, "you don't need to impress anyone here. They need to impress you." Amara almost smiled at that, though her stomach was tight with nerves. As they walked inside, the hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, and the soft music from a live orchestra surrounded them. The ballroom was vast, its ceiling painted with golden swirls, crystal chandeliers casting light like falling stars. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns that shimmered like jewels filled the room. But as Amara stepped in, conversations paused for a moment. Heads turned, eyes followed her. Whispers rose like waves on a quiet shore. Victor kept walking, his hand resting lightly at her back, guiding her forward. Some people smiled politely. Others tilted their heads as if trying to place her face, and some didn't bother hiding their frowns. "Who is she?" someone murmured as they passed. "I heard she's the waitress from that video." Another replied, "Oh, that one." A woman's voice whispered with a tone of disapproval. Amara didn't turn her head, but she felt every glance like a wait. Victor led her to a small circle of influential guests, introducing her by name. When he said, She will be leading part of my new community project." She saw surprise flicker across their faces. One man forced a smile. "Interesting choice," he said, as if the words tasted bitter as the night went on. Victor was pulled into conversations with investors and politicians. Amara found herself standing by a table covered in champagne glasses. She took one more to keep her hands busy than to drink. That was when a tall woman in a silver gown approached, her smile bright but her eyes cold. "You must be Amara," the woman said. "I've heard so much about you." Her voice was sweet, but something in it made Amara's skin prickle. "I'm Cassandra," she continued. "I went to school with Ethan, such a spirited man." Amara gave a polite nod. "Spirited isn't the word I'd use," she said softly. Sandra's smile tightened. "I suppose you'd think you've made quite the impression on Victor." Walking in here tonight, Amara sipped her champagne, not rising to the bait, but Cassandra leaned in slightly, her voice dropping so only Amara could hear. "People like you don't last long in this world. And sometimes accidents happen to those who try to play above their level." The words were soft, almost like a purr, but the meaning was sharp. Amara set her glass down slowly. Meeting Cassandra's gaze, "I'm not playing, I'm working," she said calmly. "And if that threatens you, maybe you're the one in the wrong place." Cassandra blinked, clearly not expecting a direct reply. Before she could answer, Victor returned. Placing a steady hand on Amara's shoulder, "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone polite but carrying an edge. "Perfectly," Amara replied, her eyes still on Cassandra. Cassandra excused herself with a tight smile and walked away. Victor's hand didn't leave Amara's shoulder. "People will test you tonight," he said quietly. "You've just passed your first one." The evening continued. But the whispers never stopped. Amara caught pieces of conversations as she moved through the room. "She doesn't belong here. Just a publicity stunt. Victor must be making some kind of point." She wanted to ignore it all, but the truth was, every word sank a little deeper than she wanted to admit. Still, she held her head high, smiling when she needed to, speaking when she felt it mattered. Near the end of the night, Victor invited her to stand beside him on the small stage as he gave a speech. The crowd turned toward them, the chandeliers casting light across hundreds of faces. Victor spoke about the new project, about giving opportunities to those who had been overlooked. When he mentioned her name, the applause was polite but not warm. Amara didn't need their approval. She could feel the strength in her own chest. As they stepped down from the stage, Victor leaned close and murmured, "You handled yourself better than most people here ever could." And for the first time that night, Amara smiled, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for herself. Because deep down, she knew that surviving this room was only the beginning. The real battles were still to come. The gala had ended hours ago, but Amara's heart was still beating fast. The ride back to Victor's private residence was quiet. The city lights sliding past the tinted windows like streams of gold. Victor sat beside her, calm as always, but there was a weight in his silence. When they arrived, the driver opened the door, and Victor gestured for her to follow him inside. The mansion was grand, but strangely quiet. Its hallways lined with old portraits and shelves of books. He led her into a study with a fire burning. Low in the fireplace, the room smelled faintly of leather and wood smoke. Victor poured himself a drink, then offered her one. She declined. For a moment, he said nothing, just stared into the flames, as if searching for the right words. Finally, he turned toward her, his voice low but firm. "I need to tell you the real reason I asked you here tonight." Amara's brows furrowed. "I thought it was for the project." Victor shook his head slightly. "It is, but it's also more than that." He walked toward the desk, picking up a file and placing it in front of her. Inside were photos not of buildings or blueprints, but of Ethan at high-end parties, Ethan leaving courtrooms, Ethan in heated arguments with people whose faces she didn't recognize. "These are not public," Victor said. "They're the things I've kept hidden. Because if they came out, my son's name would be ruined forever." Amara flipped through the photos, her stomach tightening. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, Victor's eyes locked on hers. "Because I believe my son is no longer capable of leading the life he was given." He took a slow breath. "I need someone to take that place, not in name, but in purpose." Amara blinked. "You're asking me to replace your son?" Victor nodded once. "In a way, yes." She sat back in the chair, trying to take it in. "You've known me for less than a week," she said. "Why would you trust me with something this big?" His voice was steady. "Because in that cafe, you showed more strength and self-respect in 5 minutes than Ethan has shown in 30 years. He walked closer, his shadow stretching across the desk. "And because you don't want power, which means you're less likely to abuse it." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Amara didn't know what to say. She thought about the whispers at the gala. The people who looked at her like she was an intruder if she took this role. She wouldn't just be managing a project, she would be stepping into a storm far bigger than she imagined. Before she could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed. In the hallway, the study door swung open, and Ethan stepped in. His eyes were sharp and his jaw tight. "So this is what tonight was really about," he said, his voice low with anger. Victor didn't flinch. "Ethan, don't." Ethan snapped. "You brought her here to humiliate me, didn't you?" Amara stood slowly, not wanting to be trapped in the chair. "I'm not here to humiliate you," she said. "I'm here because your father made me an offer." Ethan laughed bitterly. "An offer to take what's mine." Victor's voice was like steel. "What's yours is respect, and you lost that long ago." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes locked on Amara. "You think you can walk into my world and survive?" he said, his tone dripping with contempt. Victor moved between them, his presence commanding the space. "This conversation is over," he said. Ethan's eyes flashed with something darker than anger, something closer to hatred. "You'll regret this," he muttered, before turning and storming out. The door slammed hard enough to make the shelves rattle. Victor turned back to Amara, his expression unreadable. "This is what you'll be facing," he said. "People who see you as a threat simply because you stand where they don't want you to stand." Amara's chest rose slowly. "I'm not afraid of him," she said. Victor's eyes softened. "I know." He closed the file and slid it back into the desk. "Think about everything I've told you tonight, and then decide if you're ready to step into this role." As she left the study, the mansion's hallways felt colder than before. The sound of the rain outside was distant but constant. She knew one thing for certain. Whatever choice she made, it would put her on a path that could never be undone. The next morning, the city was still waking up when Amara stood by her apartment window. The streets below glistened with last night's rain, and the air smelled fresh but heavy. She hadn't slept much, her mind replaying Victor's words and Ethan's threats over and over. Every choice she could make felt dangerous, but one choice felt right. She knew she couldn't go back to the cafe and pretend life hadn't changed. Her phone buzzed, and the screen lit up with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Amara," Victor's voice came through, deep and steady. "Have you decided?" She took a slow breath, her heart thudding in her chest. "Yes," she said. "I'll do it, but not for your name, not for the money. I'll do it because I believe in the work." There was a pause on the other end. Then Victor replied, "That's exactly what I hoped you would say," an hour later. The sound of helicopter blades returned. This time, the neighbors came out onto balconies and sidewalks, pointing and murmuring as the sleek black machine descended. The wind whipped her hair and tugged at her coat as she stepped outside. Victor was waiting at the open door of the helicopter, dressed in the same calm authority he always carried. "You're ready?" he asked, his voice clear over the roar, "As ready as I'll ever be." She replied, climbing aboard inside. The seats were smooth leather, and the faint hum of the engine filled the space. As they lifted off, the city fell away beneath them, buildings shrinking into patterns of glass and stone. From above, everything looked cleaner, quieter, like all the noise and trouble of life couldn't reach them here. Victor leaned forward, placing a folder in her hands. "These are the first locations for the project," he said. "I want you to visit them, speak to the people. See what they need, not what the paperwork says they need." She opened the folder, scanning through photos of old buildings, broken streets, and smiling children. Her chest tightened. This was real. This was more than a symbol. It wasn't about walking into rich galas or standing beside Victor for show. It was about changing places and lives that had been forgotten. She glanced at him. "You could have chosen anyone," she said. Victor's lips curved slightly. "Yes. But anyone else would have used this for themselves. You'll use it for them." The helicopter tilted slightly, turning toward the coastline. The sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the water. For a moment, Amara let herself breathe. She thought of her mother, still in the hospital, and promised herself that the first thing she'd do was take care of her. She thought of Cassandra's cold smile and Ethan's angry glare, and promised herself they would never break her. Victor studied her quietly, then said, "You should know. People will try harder to push you out now, because they know you can't be bought." Amara met his gaze. "Then I'll push back harder." For the first time since she'd met him, he let out a low chuckle. "Good. That's exactly the attitude you'll need." The rest of the flight was filled with silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable one. It was the silence of two people who understood that a line had been crossed and there was no going back. As the helicopter approached the first location, Victor leaned toward her. "From this moment on, Amara, you are no longer just a waitress from a small cafe," he said. "You are someone with the power to change things, and you'll be judged for it every single day." She nodded, her hands tightening around the folder. "Then I'll make sure every day is worth a judgment." They landed in an open field beside a small, struggling neighborhood. Children ran to the edge of the grass, waving and pointing at the helicopter. Amara stepped out, the wind from the blades rushing past her face. As she walked toward them, she saw the mix of curiosity and hope in their eyes. And for the first time since this began, she felt the weight of Victor's trust settle on her shoulders, heavy, but not unwelcome, behind her. The helicopter stayed ready, its blades still spinning slowly. She glanced back at Victor, who gave her a small nod. This wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility she had chosen. She turned back toward the children and the neighborhood behind them. Her voice was quiet, but certain, as she whispered to herself, "This is where it starts."